Two men who once considered each other enemies within the very same church would end up sentenced to hard labor together, side by side, until death. Today, August 13th, the Church remembers Saints Pontian and Hippolytus, one of the most extraordinary reconciliation stories to survive from the early centuries of Christianity. Pontian was elected pope around the year 230, at a time when the Christian community of Rome was sharply divided internally. Hippolytus, a priest and one of the most learned theologians of his generation, disagreed so strongly with earlier papal decisions on how serious sins should be forgiven that he broke from the legitimate pope's authority altogether, allowing a dissident group to elect him as a rival bishop, making him, historically, the very first antipope the Church ever recorded. For years the two men stood on opposite sides of a real ecclesial rupture. But in 235, under the persecution ordered by Roman Emperor Maximus Thrax, both were arrested and deported together to the mines of Sardinia, a sentence that amounted to a slow death by exhausting forced labor. Tradition preserved decades later by Pope Damasus I tells us that, in those brutal conditions, the two former rivals reconciled, united at last in the very faith over which they had so bitterly disagreed. Pontian formally resigned the papacy from exile so Rome could elect a successor without dispute, and both men died there that same year, 235. The Church has kept their memorial together since 1969, precisely because their story proves that even the deepest division within the household of faith can end in reconciliation before God. On this same day, centuries later and in a very different corner of Europe, a captured princess would turn a stolen life into one of the great centers of learning in early medieval France. Saint Radegund, also remembered on August 13th, was born around the year 520, daughter of Bertachar, one of the kings of Thuringia. As a child she watched her own father killed in a power struggle by her uncle Hermanfrid, who then raised her in his own household. Around 531, after Thuringia's defeat, she was captured as war spoils by the Frankish king Clothar I and taken to his court, where she received a refined education before being forced, still a teenager, into marriage with the king himself. Her devotion inside that marriage was so intense that Clothar reportedly complained of having, in his own words, a nun, not a queen, for a wife. After Clothar had her own brother executed for political reasons, Radegund finally obtained permission to leave the court, and around 557 she founded the Abbey of the Holy Cross in Poitiers, France, turning it into one of the great centers of religious life and learning in Merovingian Gaul. The abbey took its very name after she obtained from the Byzantine Emperor Justin II a relic believed to be a fragment of the true cross of Christ, a treasure that drew pilgrims to the region for centuries afterward. She died on this same date, August 13th, in the year 587, at about 67 years old, and is venerated today as patroness of refugees and of those suffering domestic abuse, a patronage rooted directly in her own captured, forced beginning. Across the same era but on the far side of the old Roman world, a former court official would have his own tongue cut out and his hand amputated simply for refusing to say Christ had only one will. Saint Maximus the Confessor, also honored on August 13th, was born around the year 580 in Constantinople. Before becoming a monk around 613, he served as a high official at the court of the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, an experience that gave him the refined political and theological grounding he would later bring to his life's work as one of the 7th century's greatest Christian thinkers. He became the leading opponent of monothelitism, a doctrine backed by the emperor of the day, which taught that Christ possessed only a single divine will rather than two distinct wills, divine and human, united in one person, a position Maximus saw as a direct threat to Christ's genuine humanity, and therefore to human salvation itself. For flatly refusing to accept this imperially backed doctrine even under direct pressure from the court, he was arrested, tried for treason, and, according to well-documented eyewitness accounts from the period, had his tongue cut out and his right hand amputated by imperial order, mutilations meant specifically to permanently silence him. He nonetheless survived several more years in exile in the Caucasus, where he died on August 13, 662, at the age of 82. Decades later, in 681, the Third Council of Constantinople officially confirmed his theological position as orthodox, cementing him as a central figure of Eastern Christian theology. He carries the title, Confessor, reserved for those who suffered greatly for the faith without being put to death outright, and his life teaches that truth defended at the cost of one's own body is never truth wasted. Many centuries later, in a very different setting, a shoemaker's son would become known not for any dramatic miracle, but for doing the smallest daily tasks with total devotion. Saint John Berchmans, also celebrated on August 13, was born in 1599 in Diest, Belgium, the eldest son of a shoemaker. As a child he already showed a strong desire for religious life, becoming, at only 13, a servant in the household of a cathedral canon in Mechelen. In 1615 he entered the newly founded Jesuit college in that same city, and became a Jesuit novice the following year. In 1618 he was sent to Rome to continue his studies, where he impressed his superiors and fellow students with his extraordinary dedication even to the simplest, most ordinary tasks of daily life, summed up in a phrase that would become famous long after him: doing ordinary things extraordinarily well. He took as his personal model the also young Jesuit Saint Aloysius Gonzaga. In August 1621, he came down with a sudden high fever and died within days, on August 13, at only 22 years old, before ever completing his studies for the priesthood. He was beatified in 1865 and canonized in 1888, a process that included a miracle attributed to him at a Catholic academy in Louisiana, in the United States, in 1866. He is venerated today as patron saint of altar servers, students, and young Jesuits still in formation, and his short life teaches that holiness rarely needs a dramatic stage, it grows instead in how faithfully we handle the small things nobody else is watching. Going back many centuries earlier, a schoolteacher would be killed by the very students he had once taught and disciplined. Saint Cassian of Imola, also remembered on August 13, was a 4th-century schoolmaster and martyr, killed on this date in the year 363, in the Italian city of Imola, during the brief reign of the Roman Emperor Julian the Apostate, an emperor known for trying to reverse Christianization across the empire and restore traditional pagan worship. According to tradition preserved in ancient hagiographic accounts, Cassian worked as a schoolmaster in the city when he was ordered to sacrifice to the Roman gods, and refused. He was condemned to death for that refusal, but in a particularly cruel and symbolic way. Rather than being executed by soldiers, he was handed over to his own former students, many of whom, seizing the chance for revenge over past school punishments, tied him to a stake and killed him by repeatedly stabbing him with their own wax tablet writing styluses, an everyday school tool of the era turned into a weapon. This detail, unusual among ancient martyrdom accounts precisely because the executioners were the students themselves, cemented his cult as patron of teachers, stenographers, and clerks, as well as patron of the city of Imola and, through a historical link to Spanish colonization, of Mexico City as well. Cassian's life teaches that even the people closest to us, the ones we've poured our own work into, can turn against us, and faithfulness has to survive that possibility too. And we close today's journey, August 13, with a monk who spent his life training missionaries for a part of Europe most people had already given up on converting. Saint Wigbert was born around the year 675 in the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex, England, and died on this same date, August 13, 747, at about 72 years old. A Benedictine monk, he became one of the chief disciples and mission companions of Saint Boniface, the great evangelizer of Germany, traveling with him through Frisia and regions of northern and central German territory to convert still pagan tribes to Christianity, starting in 734. Boniface appointed him abbot of the monastery of Hersfeld, in Hesse, and then, around 737, transferred his leadership to the region of Thuringia, where Wigbert founded the monastery of Ohrdruf and established there a school specifically dedicated to training new missionaries for the evangelization of that still largely unchristianized part of Germanic territory. Throughout his life, he also spent periods as an anchorite and hermit, remembered by tradition for miracles and prophecies attributed to him. He is venerated today as patron of the German town of Bad Hersfeld, home to his original monastery, and his life teaches that some of the greatest missionary work isn't preaching in public at all, but quietly forming the next generation who will carry it forward. And with that, we close today's 6 saints and blesseds of August 13. If any of these lives touched your heart, subscribe here to Saint of the Day, and give this video a like. Comment asking for one of their intercession for someone you love. And most of all, share this video, because every time you share a story like this one, you're not just passing along a video, you're evangelizing. You're carrying the faith to someone who might need to hear exactly this message today. Your share could be the reason someone starts praying again, walks back into a church, or finds hope in a hard moment. And remember, the complete prayer to each of them is right here in the video description.